Now, it was one day until the election, Donald Trump continues to claim that the system is rigged against him and his voters. By the system, I mean our electoral system, our system of voting. Now, his supporters claim that there will be massive voter fraud in the likes never seen before in an election. I mean, people are going to come out, there's going to be voter fraud everywhere, it's going to be crazy, and then somehow that's going to make him lose, right? Now, he is partly right. Yes, the system is rigged, but no, not in the way he means, and certainly not against him or his supporters. Now, let me explain. Now, while he can make a case that the media is against him, he could make that case. It would be a sort of weak case, since he did, after all, get billions of dollars in free advertising. The ability to phone it in on shows like Morning Joe and, CNN and other places where he could just call in or he would just get all this free advertising, somewhere around $2-3 billion. While he can make a sort of weak case that, the media is against me because they do run negative stories. And they've ran the story about Billy Bush and stuff that he's actually said in context. You could make a case that they're maybe against him, sure. But you can't actually factually make a case that the voting system is rigged against him and his followers. That is just not true. Now let me explain. Who are Trump supporters? Well, a lot of Trump support comes from white people. White working class people. People like me. I'm white. I'm working class. I've never been in middle class. I've always been a blue collar guy. Even like before my show, I've worked in retail. I've worked in the factories. Okay. I did manufacturing. I worked with my hands. I wasn't very good at it, but I worked with my hands because that was the work that was available. So I am blue collar. Never was rich. Never was fancy. Still ain't. I'm in the wrong job if I want to get rich. But anyway, white working class people like me, white middle class, and look, there are a lot of white older people that make up a space. And yes, there are also scattered minorities that are supporting Donald Trump. Now, why do I focus on the white older people? Well, because that's generally who makes it up to the polls the most. And that is really your standard Republican voter. Those people always tend to make it to the polls, okay? They normally don't have a lot of problems. The baby boomers, they're always out there. They're always reliable. And that's what makes up Republican support. And that's who's making up a lot of the support of Donald Trump. Now, those people, as I said, they always make it to the polls because the system really isn't rigged that much against them. The system is rigged against poor people, minorities, and students. Now, most of those groups, I think you know who they generally vote for. Democrats. Yeah. Now, some of the rigging is by design. It's intentional, right? This is the rigging, right? And it kind of dates back, some of it dates back to the founding of America. The creation of the Senate, for example, being a barrier against change. That's one of the things. Now, some of it is also a byproduct of our crony capitalist system, where the 0.1% have more than almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. Now, the rest of these are somewhere in between. It's neither here nor there. Okay. Now, here are some of the ways. I have a list. This is sounding like a BuzzFeed listicle already, but I promise it's not. It's very factual. Here are some of the ways in which the voting system is rigged. Okay. For one, you have to register to vote. Now, for us, register to vote. You should register to vote. That seems like a natural thing living in America. But it's not a natural thing. In most other countries, they're already pre-registered to vote. They're automatically registered. And see, here's the facts on this, right? Between 1/4 and 1/3 of American adults, or up to 50 million people, are eligible to vote, but are not registered to vote. So most people that are eligible doesn't mean that they're registered, doesn't mean they're going to vote. Now, all of these other countries, France, Italy, Chile, or Israel, Sweden, Denmark, and Finland, they all register to vote people, or everyone to vote automatically. And of course, they have a much higher voter turnout since everybody's already registered. Now, the people who are generally unregistered are usually younger people, poorer, and less white than registered voters. They're also more likely to support progressive political policies, such as a higher minimum wage and a financial transactions tax, otherwise known as a Robin Hood tax. See, this is why we need that automatic registration. Bernie Sanders, he said, hey, let's do automatic voter registration. Let's go further. Let's do a voting holiday. Now, that's a little bit later, but here's the case of why we need it. See, to have to go out of your way when you're working hard at your job, when you're juggling your family, you're juggling your career, you're having 2 to 3 uniquely American jobs, you don't always have time to go out and register to vote. It adds an extra burden onto what should be a right. Then that ain't right. Now, the good news is that 5 states, Oregon, California, West Virginia, Vermont, and Connecticut, now have nearly automatic voter registration. Other states are also considering that. Now, do you notice anything about those states? If you answered that they are mostly liberal, well, yes, that would be the correct answer. Mostly liberal. Why? It's because Democrats, liberals, want more people able to vote. More of the population to vote. Now, here's another problem with our election system, the way that it's rigged against poor people. Election is a work day. Okay? Look, Tuesday, right? Tomorrow, most people, they don't get Tuesday off. And most people who, look, if you can't miss work because you're living paycheck to paycheck, well, you're not going to be able to take time out to go and vote. Now, if you're retired or if you're wealthy, well, there's nothing stopping you from going out and making to the polls. And generally, the people who are older and wealthier tend to vote more Republican. So that's why Republicans often get to the polls more often than Democrats. Because Democrats are usually too busy working to survive. Or they don't have transportation, or they've got school, or they're very elderly and poor, living off Social Security. Those are some problems. Now, how could we fix some of that? Well, early voting. More early voting, expanded early voting, as well as adding in a voting holiday, which you could basically take the day off to vote. Problem solved. Another issue that we have is gerrymandering. Now, in 2012, a slight majority of Americans voted for a Democrat for their congressional representative. Nonetheless, there are more elected Republicans than Democrats in the House. Now, wait a minute. If voting weren't rigged, then you would have, if more Democrats voted for Democrats, for members of the House, why are there more Republicans in the House? Well, it's because of gerrymandering. Now, currently, Republican state legislatures use computer software to basically pack as many Democrats into as few districts as possible, creating some really fucked up looking districts. You remember the gerrymander, the thing that it was named after, right? Now, the computers can create these districts, these fucked up districts. If they can create the fucked up ones, they can create unfucked up ones too. Ones that are compact and contiguous, right? Now, that's not the only issue. Gerrymandering, yes, big issue, right? But look, it's easier to pack Democrats in certain areas because there are a lot of Democrats that choose to live in certain areas around each other. Normally, when it comes to bigger cities. So even if you had fairer districts, Democrats still might have a disadvantage because of where many of us choose to live. Now, I don't live in a Democratic area. I live in a Republican district. So I don't have that issue. But you look at New York, you look at LA, well, those are the most liberal cities, and they happen to have the most liberals in them. They're not spread out across the country, so they're not being as represented. So, nonetheless, we still need to call for a nonpartisan commission to help draw up these new districts and these new fairer districts and end the process of gerrymandering once and for all. Now, the next one might be a little bit controversial. You see, right now, felons are not allowed to vote. In fact, over 6 million Americans cannot vote this year because they've been convicted of a felony. Now you might be thinking, okay, yeah, Jeff, but look, they broke the law. You know, that's part of breaking the law means you lose some of your rights. Okay, but permanently? I mean, you lose your right to vote. I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. But look, maybe if you're in prison, you shouldn't vote. And I'm not even firm on that position, right? In fact, if you make a good argument as to why prisoners should be allowed to vote, I'll think about it, I'll consider it, and maybe be like, hey, you know what, that's a great point. Well, right now, I haven't heard any of those arguments. Now, if you're out of prison and you've served your time, well, you should have your right to vote back. You should get your rights back. Now, there is a racial component to this as well. Now, over 2.2 million people in prison are African Americans. In Florida, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia, more than 1 in 5 black adults are unable to vote. Now, I know the conservative reaction to this is going to be, well, if you want to vote, stop committing crimes. I know. I love how it's such a simple black and white argument. Literally, in this case, stop committing crimes. Well, black and white people commit crimes at approximately the same rate. Especially when it comes to drug crimes. And look, this is where this gets to be important. You see, a lot of these crimes that are landing black people in prison are drug-related crimes, from possession to sale. Now, in possession, I say, let them go. Why is marijuana illegal? As for other drugs, maybe we should take a look at what Portugal did and decriminalize all drugs and set up our system as a system of treatment instead of criminalizing people, putting people in prison for using a drug. Now, drug dealers, a little bit of a different story, but still, the point is, if you've served your time, you should get your right to vote back. And other countries are far more liberal than we are on this issue. In fact, France, Germany, Israel, Japan, the Netherlands, Sweden, Norway, Peru, Poland, and Romania allow everyone to vote, including those convicted of felonies and even those in prison. That might be a little too far, but as I said, make a good argument, I'll change my mind. Now, voter suppression, very important thing, right? So Paul Ryrick, which is one of the founders of today's modern conservative movement, made the famous Goo Syndrome speech. Now, where he explained essentially that, hey, I don't want everybody to vote. Quite candidly, our leverage in the elections quite candidly goes up as the voting populace goes down. Meaning, we don't want more people to vote. We want less people to vote because then we actually win. And see, this is why Republicans are doing things like purging voter rolls of eligible voters. We've seen a lot of that. Reducing polling times and places, requiring photo IDs, and doing voter intimidation. Now, on the voter intimidation, I recently did a segment where neo-Nazi groups, Oath Keepers, and other right-wing groups are going around, quote, patrolling polling places in order to intimidate voters. And see, that's their strategy. Well, don't let the other side vote because they outnumber us and they actually have better ideas. Well, we can't have that. We're going to have to intimidate them so that they don't go out to the polls. Now, the next one is for a lot of you third-party supporters that are in the audience. Now, a problem is that we don't have an instant runoff system, basically locking us into a two-party system. Now, let me explain what instant runoff is. First, it basically lets third-party supporters vote for their first choice without fear that there'll be a spoiler and help elect somebody like Donald Trump. And here's how it works. Voters rank as many candidates as they like in the order of their preference, from first to last. If a candidate gets a majority of first-choice ballots, he or she wins. If not, the last-place candidate is eliminated, and his or her votes are distributed to the candidates who are second choice of the eliminated candidate's supporters, and so on. Now, let me put it in terms of this current election. So, say you're a Jill Stein supporter, and likely you are, right? But you really don't want Donald Trump. But you live in a swing state, and you're like, I don't know, man. I really want to go green. That fucking Trump scares the shit out of me. Well, you could say, with instant runoff voting, that Stein supporter could rank Stein as his or her first choice, Clinton as second, and Trump last or not at all. Now, that basically means that, hey, if Stein doesn't win, your vote still goes to Clinton, even though she was not your first choice, so you don't have to worry about giving a vote to Donald Trump. Now, that would solve a lot of problems, especially the problem that I've seen lately of people vote shaming each other. Oh, you're ridiculous for wanting to vote for Stein or whatever. No, that's bullshit. I don't think that you should be able to shame other people for their votes. And going to ranked choice voting eliminates that, gets rid of it. Now, this, of course, is why both parties tend to hate this idea, because it would effectively break the two-party system. And the fact that the two parties hate this so much means that it's kind of a good idea. And I would definitely like to see this happen. Imagine, as I said, no more vote shaming for third-party candidates. You can vote for Stein, you can vote for Johnson, or Jimmy McMillan, the rent is too damn high guy, or whatever, without having to worry about helping elect the guy that you hate. People could actually vote their conscience. And if there's one priority the Green Party or the Libertarian Party should have, it's to try to get instant runoff voting implemented into law. Push for a campaign. That's what I would love to see the Green Party do over these next 4 years, is to say, we're tired of this two-party system. We're going to break it. We're going to introduce instant runoff, ranked choice voting. That's what I'd love to see. Now, there are, of course, other things that basically rig the system against the regular person. There's the Senate, of course. The way that the Senate is set up is that it really helps the smaller states, the less populous states, have representation, right? For example, Wyoming has a very, very small population, gets 2 senators. California also gets 2 senators, but has a population 66 times greater than Wyoming. The Senate was also created as a vehicle to stop change. Now, James Madison, the main author of the Constitution, put it in 1787, quote, "Our government ought to secure the permanent interests of the country against innovation and protect the minority of the opulent against the majority. The Senate," Madison said, "should be part of the government designed to do this." Not exactly progressive. In fact, the opposite. No, we're trying to stop progressives. We're trying to stop progress. And we're trying to protect the rich. That's the whole point of the Senate. Because we can't have all these rich people or all these poor people vote against the interests of the rich people. No, we don't want that at all. So we're going to implement the Senate to do that. Interesting. Now, another point that goes against regular people is the fact that you can't vote for the Federal Reserve. Basically, the Federal Reserve controls a lot in our government. It has 7 governors that are appointed by presidents to 14-year terms. Now, the Federal Open Market Committee, which controls interest rates, is made up of the 7 governors plus 5 members who are presidents of the regional reserve banks. The regional presidents are chosen in a process that's largely controlled by banks. Now, the Federal Reserve is a very important part of the economy. And you can't vote for these people? Sure, you can vote for a president who's more or less going to be corporatist, who's going to appoint corporatists. And that brings me to the last one. Corporations that are in charge of pretty much everything. See, it seems that no matter who you vote for, you still end up getting business-friendly politicians. Now, I'm not saying that you should ban businesses or elect people who are going to destroy all business. No, that's stupid. That's crazy. Jill Stein isn't even against business. Now, what I mean by business friendly is basically more business. An example of business friendly regulation is lack of regulation, reducing regulation, or making the rules harder for a competitor. Or you also have subsidies for companies, for example, oil companies that still get massive tax breaks. You get Walmart that gets tax breaks, that also benefits from food stamps, the food stamp system. So they can pay their employees very, very little while subsidizing themselves on government money that is spent at Walmart through those food benefits. See, these politicians, Democrats and Republicans, they agree on one thing: business-friendly policies like corporate tax cuts. Now, with the exception of a few, of course. You have Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, there are many others. But the point is that mostly the establishment favors big business, and the establishment and big business have an outsized influence on public policy. Remember that Princeton study done a while back? It said the policy priorities of regular people had no statistical effects on policy that's actually passed in the government. That's, of course, the desires of the voters. Basically, this is saying that that's statistically insignificant. The desires of the voters. That's why you don't see things like the role of money in politics get curtailed, or why you don't see a rise in the minimum wage. That's why you see things like the bank bailouts. So, even if you get to vote for somebody, know that who you vote for, by the time the general election has come, will likely serve corporate interests. That, in a way, I think is a form of disenfranchisement, where you have literally no choice. Now, that's why, of course, I was harping on the primaries so much. Get involved, vote, get involved in the primaries. Don't just wait until the general election, because you don't have a choice in a general election. At least in the primaries, you have democracy. But sadly, only 9% of Americans voted in these primaries. It really is pretty sad. Now, basically what you're left with is a system that is set up to help the rich and powerful stay rich and powerful. Now, that includes people like Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Neither of them are looking out for you. They're there to serve the corporations and likely their own financial interests. And that is how the system is rigged. All of these things play together to ensure the rich and the powerful maintain control while you don't. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent, non-corporate media, go to our Patreon page and become a patron. Patreon.com/TYTNation.